Welcome to our Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Our topic today, Madagascar, a journey to the eighth continent. We are here with two of our amazing exploration leaders, Richard and Matt, both of them coming to us from South Africa. And I am going to let them tell you a little bit about themselves and then launch right into their presentation. So welcome, gentlemen.
Hi, Lee.
Hi, Richard. Hey, Matt. Do we have you too?
Yes, Lee. How's it going?
Good, great. All right. We'll let you go for it.
Start, Matt.
Rich, do you want to go first?
Yeah.
Cool. My name's Matt, as you can see. Hail from South Africa. I've been running trips to Madagascar since 2017. I've just come off the tail end of a fundraiser for rhino conservation in the United States and jumped right into Madagascar and have loved guiding there ever since. I will hopefully be guiding up to my 20th trip there this year, and lots to share, lots of amazing stuff.
Thanks, Matt. Guys, my name's Richard. I'm in Johannesburg in South Africa, and I've been guiding for NatHab for just over 5 years now and love every minute of it. And one of the coolest places that we visit is Madagascar. Wildlife is crazy, people are awesome, and just looking forward to sharing some of it with you this evening. Or this afternoon for you guys. It's late here. Matt, you there?
Yes. So, okay, folks, so without further ado, let's dive into some awesome stuff that is Madagascar. Now, a lot of people, their first reaction when you say Madagascar is not these two, is this. People often associate the comical side of the movie Madagascar, which is actually what made it famous and put it on the mark somewhat 15 odd years ago now. But there's a lot more to Madagascar than just the movie. The biodiversity is incredible with over 110, 120 species of lemur. We've got over 100 species of chameleon. That little porcupine-looking thing is a tenrec. And then 6 out of the 9 species of baobab that are found worldwide are endemic to Madagascar. Just a little bit about how it got where it is. You can see from this section of clips here where it originally was in terms of Gondwana and Pangaea and how things shifted and moved around tectonically to put it in its current position, which is there off the east coast of Africa. As it shifted and moved from Africa, it kind of seesawed its way, which gave rise to a mountain range or along most of the east coast, and then these really weird rock formations along most of the west coast called Tsingy, which is the leftover or basically the remnants of old coral beds, the limestone. So it's an incredibly diverse island, 4th largest island in the world, nicknamed the 8th continent. And the diversity was exacerbated by it being isolated. So the way that most of the creatures got there that weren't there when it split from Africa, the most sort of reasonable explanation was that they were washed on a land raft, if you would call it that, from flood debris and all of that from East Africa. And if you look back onto that, you can actually see that it shifted up and down, and it only was where it is now in the last sort of 50, 60 million years. So with the currents, the ocean currents were very different somewhat 30, 40, 50, 60 million years ago. And so that allowed these land rafts of animals from Africa to then be swept across. So it shows you here, you can see that chameleon at the top there, that's the Austerlitz chameleon. It's the longest chameleon in the world. It's almost just over 2 feet long. Then the parsons in the bottom left is the heaviest. You're looking at something about, you can see it's about as heavy as a house cat. And then this little Brachysia micro, it fits on the tip of someone's thumb. That's a little matchstick over there. So that's just one group of creatures that has this incredible diversity that's not seen in many other places in the world. But then from here, we are going to head into the stars of the show, and I'm going to hand over back to Rich to talk a little bit about these guys.
Thanks, Matt. Let's jump right in. We actually rehearsed this joke beforehand. Guys, I'm gonna go through the basics of some of the lemurs, and Matt will take over after a bit. But lemurs are definitely one of the more unique species that are on the island. They make up a part called the prosimians group. We can go to the next slide. Thanks, Matt. And this literally means before monkey, pre-simian, before monkey. So this is just a basic breakdown of the classification of primates. And to the left, the green line going down to the left are our pre-simians, your prosimians. So your lemurs all fall down that side, and you can see how the old world, new world monkeys, apes, all the way down to us are on the right-hand side. So our common ancestor would have split a long time ago. And then thereafter that, they moved across to our beautiful island called Madagascar. And this happened probably between 50 to 55 million years ago. And the endemism is huge. I mean, if you consider the amount of primate species on the planet, just Madagascar has 15% of the world's primate species, 20% of the primate genera, and a third of the world's primate families are endemic to Madagascar. So you can just understand how incredible this is. And to think that all of them got there on these rafts that Matt was talking about, and how the ocean currents at that stage pulled it across. And we have to then start, I'm going to move into our first family, which is called Cherrygallidae. And Cherrygallidae is made up of mouse lemurs and dwarf lemurs. And the dwarf lemurs were thought to be the first ones that actually managed to get across. And this family are known for their abilities to hibernate, to go into extended periods of torpor. Something like the fat-tailed dwarf lemur stores about 60%, or when it goes into hibernation, 60% of its body weight is within its tail. And it uses those fat stores during this hibernation period. And because of that long journey from Africa across the Mozambique Channel to Madagascar, that tail or that hibernation is possibly one of the reasons why they managed to get across. And that's like a fairly large, or not a large, but a bigger type of lemur. But looking at the one that's in the picture, there is a little mouse lemur. Now, the smallest one weighs a whole ounce, 30 grams, 1 ounce. They're tiny. They're incredible. They are, they do these hibernations again, but they flit around, and they're definitely the most abundant of all of the lemurs, and you'll find different species in different forests. But what's cool about these guys is that the mouse lemur females actually hibernate and the males don't. And the reason is to stop this intraspecies competition. So the males have a chance to build themselves up while the females sleep. And when the females wake up, there's now this big competition between the females or between the males for the females. The females don't have to fight for their position at the mating table. So they're really cool little lemurs. Like I say, each forest will normally have 1 or 2 of each of those species within it. One of the places that we visit is called Anjajavi. There's 3 different species, and all of them are so similar to one another that you actually, upon looking at them, you'll never tell the difference. You have to actually go and do DNA testing, which will lead me into my next family called Lepidlemuridae, which are the sportive lemurs. And of all of these lemurs within this group are nocturnal species. They tend to hide themselves in wedges in logs or in holes in trees. And you can see this little guy was a little surprised at us sneaking up on him. And there are 26 different species of them, 18 of which have been described in 15 years. I mean, we're talking about incredible science that's going on. And because of the remoteness of this island and it more being off the map than people realized, until the movie Madagascar came, people weren't really too interested in this place besides high-level scientists. One of the things that gets me all the time is we get there and you ask the local guides, what is that? And they'll come out with this Latin name that's 20 feet long and expect everyone to understand it. It's just one of those factors that comes into it. But these little Lepidolurimidae, these sportive lemurs, are the smallest of the folivorous primates. They are primarily folivorous, and they sleep in these holes. And the one that is most outstanding is one that we visit in a place called Zimbabwe, and it was for a long time lumped with a sportive lemur called the Hubbard sportive lemur. And very recently, they've actually split it off and realized through DNA testing that it is actually a species unto its own. They look identical, but DNA-wise, they're not. So this recent DNA or genetic research has started to split things up. So from having 50 species, say 25 years ago, through to 110 different species now, just because of this DNA testing. So I'm going to hand over to Matt and he can carry on with the rest of these cool creatures.
So Richard just covered the first two families, the five remaining families of lemurs, which were both nocturnal, and now we're shifting into the bridge between your diurnal and nocturnal. And the Lemuridae is what has been deemed the true lemurs, because that is what the facial structure, the body makeup and the composition, and basically what everyone then thinks of when they think of a lemur. You can see on the left-hand side there's the most iconic lemur species, the ringtail lemur. They're also the most terrestrial. They spend most of their time on the ground, unlike most other lemurs who spend most of their time in trees. This little lemur on the bottom right is called the common brown lemur, and nicknamed the pig lemur because it makes this funny little piggy noise when it runs around and hops between the trees. The black and white rough lemur at the top, a very big canopy dweller. These guys are one of the more widespread and diverse because of their differing size and habitats, and also food choices. But they also comprise, this is the one group that comprises terrestrial as well as arboreal. They're broken down into this first group, which are the true lemurs, and then the second group of Lemuridae are the bamboo lemurs. Now, what makes these guys unique is their ability to process the high levels of cyanide that are found in bamboo. The greater bamboo lemur, which is the one who's got he's got his tongue out and you can see he's eating a little bamboo shoot there. They almost entirely only eat bamboo, from the shoots to the leaves to the bark, everything about it. And that has allowed them to have the special adaptation to process cyanide. The golden bamboo lemur on the left-hand side, also a very iconic species in one of the forests we go to in Ranamafana, which was where it was basically almost ground zero where research started for lemurs in Madagascar, and it was the discovery of this golden bamboo lemur that allowed that to take place. They are mainly found along the eastern rainforests, along that mountainous area, and it's strange because they're one of three groups of creatures in the world that have this ability, along with the mountain gorillas in Central Africa and then the pandas of Asia. Going on to the next group, we have the Indridae, which are They're hosted or host of the largest living lemur on the left-hand side, the Indri, named by the locals Baba Kutu, which means the father of Kutu. And these are the Indri can get up to about 9 kilos, 6 to 9 kilos, so about 12 to 20 odd pounds. And this group are known as vertical clingers and leapers. So you can see the woolly lemur on the right-hand side, how his knee is almost up to his chin, and that gives them that ability to grasp onto a tree limb, and then they bounce off of it in a very unique fashion. Like we saw one of the first pictures where we jumped into lemurs, as Richard was saying, with that sifaka. They've got this bounding motion. So they are entirely terrestrial. They come down, entirely arboreal. They come down to the ground for minerals and for water, but other than that, they're up in the treetops all the time. The next slide I'm going to show is you can hear it's the call of the Indri. So if you would just allow me to play this here. Well, I hope you could hear that. If you couldn't, go and Google Indri calling in the wild, and it sounds almost like a whale calling into a tin can. And they do this every morning. It's their territorial call, and they go from side of the forest to side of the forest. The families call to one another and announce their territories. And then the third group of lemurs in the Indridae, so you got the Indri, the woolly lemurs, and then the sifakas. And these are the dancing lemurs. They're known as those, as you can see, the one on the bottom right, that is hopping its way across the grass there. And all of them, you can see that very pronounced high hip and knee movement, which is iconic of this group. The one on the left there, the Didian sifaka, you can see it's very much perched on a tree. And this one, when they're about to jump, because an interesting thing about lemurs is that they because they evolved as Richard was explaining at the beginning, their eyes don't oscillate in their eye sockets, so their eyes are fixed. So whenever they want to focus on something, they've actually got to move their heads completely. So they do this bobbing motion when they're about to, and then they jump. And it's we have slowly sort of figured out with the help of our local guides to anticipate their movements, and it certainly makes things a little bit easier to photograph when you can see that head bob, and then you know, okay, it's just about to jump, and then they go. So those are the sifakas. So that's our fourth group of lemurs. And then moving on to the final group, and don't be surprised when you see these guys, but this is the Dobintoniidae, who are arguably the most odd primate or creature in the world. This is the ii. Now, the ii, as you can see it there, is the last remaining species of this family of lemurs. There were two species. The one went extinct kind of around the colonization of the island by people, and they are incredibly unique. You can see those long spindly fingers. Their middle finger is 3 or 4 times the length of the rest of their digits. They use those giant ears to listen for larvae and grubs inside bark and wooden logs. And then their incisors are like rodents. They're continuously growing out. And they were actually they were only reclassified as a lemur. They were thought to be part of the rodentias originally because of those continually elongating incisors. And so they use those to gnaw at the tree bark, and then that long finger to get the grubs out. And these are also the largest nocturnal primates in the world. Recently discovered to actually have a 6 digits underneath here. So what they've nicknamed a pseudo thumb. And you can see that the chap on the bottom right is just as surprised as we are that he's got another thumb. But that's because they've got these over specialized fingers, especially this middle one, and with over specialization needs to come adaptation for survival. And so those are specialized at feeding, but if you've got these long spindly fingers, you can't really climb trees too well. And so that pseudo thumb, as you can see in the MRI in the middle there with all of those colors, it's mainly it's just a piece of cartilage holding a bone, and it's mainly tendons. So that's to allow them to grip. So it's just like having a second thumb. Bears and other 6-digit creatures lost that when they started walking like that. They still have their 6 digits, but they don't have to grip onto anything. And so the eye is not just a weird looking creature, but it's now also the largest nocturnal primate that has 2 thumbs.
Cool. Let's move on to some birds. And obviously the lemurs are a massively impressive part of the island, but anything that got there had to swim, float, or fly. And obviously birds then come into a big part of this, with almost 300 different species of bird, 220 of which actually breed on the island. That ability to move from mainland Africa and to the island meant that they could breed and then evolve in different ways. So there's a huge level of endemism. 2 orders are endemic, and they're the mesites and the cuckoo rollers. The mesites we don't see a lot on our trips because they're more towards the drier areas. And then the cuckoo rollers we hear all the time, very beautiful birds, confusing birds. As their name suggests, a cuckoo and a roller all mixed into one with these beautiful green colors, and they fly overhead and they make these beautiful calls as they're flying, but you can't see them because there's a forest above you. And then there's 3 family level endemics, which are the ground rollers, acetes, and the Malagasy warblers, also known as tetrarchas. So basically the ground rollers are made up of 5 different species. And to put it in perspective, if you consider how things all move together, these species, there's 4 of which are in forest and 1 in desert. And because when everything ends up on one island, you're all trying to find these little niches. So this picture here is of the scaly ground roller, really beautiful bird that we see in Ranamofana, very seldomly seen. But like this one, you get it, and it came out and it just sat on the path and did nothing and just watched us for a while. So really beautiful, but very often shy birds. And then we move on to the acetes, which are these tiny little birds that are beautiful. They have this incredible iridescence about them. You've got the yellow-bellied acete on the right and the velvet acete on the left. And that green on the top, for the person that got that photo of the velvet acete is very lucky, because they live in these really dense forests and it's dark. And you can imagine how trying to photograph a black bird in dark is incredibly difficult. And their sounds are not really amazing, but what they use to attract females is this fairly loud whirring sound with a 10th primary feather, which they point out, they extend, and it creates the sound, and they can then move it in. So they use it while they're doing courtship and defensive displays. So very beautiful but unique birds within there. Matt, can we go back 2 slides? Sorry, I just want to go back to the common birds, because I jumped over those things when we were moving through. What we've got in the top left corner is a Madagascar paradise flycatcher, and they look very similar to the African ones, but there's 3 different color variants, this being the normal one, but there's also a black and white one with a lot of white, and then a white and black one with a lot of black. And so they've got these different tails that come out and different things. Another unique bird to Madagascar on the bottom left is the Madagascar sacred ibis, which again is almost identical to what we have in Africa, except it's got this beautiful luminous blue eye. And then the Madagascar fish eagle on the right-hand side, which looks fairly similar to the African fish eagle, but when they went across, they're now not fishing just in dams and lakes and things like that. They actually fish in the ocean. And they've been so threatened by habitat loss and things like that, that there are only 200 breeding pairs left on the planet. I mean, really, really, really small numbers. So, and then we'll jump back forward to one of the coolest birds that's out there. So Madagascar is basically like Galapagos, except a lot larger and being separated for a lot longer. And when we think of Galapagos, we think of Darwin and his finches and how he noted the different bill shapes according to their necessities. The vangers have done this exact same thing. So on the left, we have a helmeted vanger, which has this big casque bill and is quite a large bird. And then we have the sickle-billed vanger, and then your white-headed vanger down the bottom. And in order to avoid this interspecies competition that I keep on bringing about, you have one bird that would have come across and started to proliferate, and then starting to find niches. They all feed on very similar things. So like a nuthatch vanger will climb up trees much like a nuthatch does, except it doesn't climb downwards. You've got the crossleys, which forages by walking along the forest floor. So its niche, one's going up and down the trees, one's feeding on the forest floor. The Shabbat vanger and the Tyler's vanger often hawk their prey, so they actually fly and catch things in the air. And then you have something like the Pollens vanger, which actually strips bark and feeds under the bark. So you've got 4 birds, 4 different species, feeding on very, very similar things, except in different places, so that there's no species competition between the guys. And then another really cool bird that we get to see there is called a kua, which is related to the cuckoos. It looks like a turaco and it moves like a kukul. So it's a highly confused bird. Can you move to the next slide, Matt? Thanks, man. And there you can see it. And one of the big characteristics is the bare eye patch, and it's got this iridescent, colorful blue around the eye. This is a giant kua that we see in Zimbabwe. It's probably about 7 or 8 inches off the ground, so it's a fairly good sized bird. And we actually have one that comes, yeah, you can see Matt. Matt's a big chap. They move around on the ground, foraging in the forest floor, and they make these really cool, very cool calls as they're moving along through there. And these four, yeah? You're going to say, Matt? Meow. Meow. Yeah, it sounds like a car going very fast past you. 4 species occur in rainforest, and the remaining 6 are found in dry forest areas. Some are arboreal and some ground dwelling. And again, you start seeing, because of the speciation, the niche speciation that happens, that they try to find different areas to move away from one another. One of the coolest birds, unfortunately, that we can't see anymore, but is the extinct elephant bird. And elephant birds were giant flightless birds related to ostriches. You can see in that image just how big it was. It was 10 feet tall and could weigh anything between 1,000 and 1,400 pounds. And some scientists even believe that they could have reached 1,900 pounds in size. And look at the size of that egg. Incredible. Now, when we talk about this extinction, most extinction on the island happened after people arrived, and people arrived between 3,000 and 2,500 years ago, and they started settling at about 2,000 years. So these guys were on the island with the people for a long time, because they only went extinct between 1,500 and 1,300 years ago. And a lot of these eggs are still around. You still find them fossilized. There was a big confusion at one stage because somebody found one in Australia, and it had obviously floated on ocean currents to get that side. But incredibly, they eventually wound it back all the way back to Madagascar, where they found that one. On to you, Matt.
So some of the things that we are fortunate to be a part of, and one of the things that is a sort of an ethos, a resonating ethos with NatHab is our emphasis on conservation travel. And we, Richard and I and a couple of other guides, we've been fortunate to be involved with their Fusa projects. One of the places that we visit up north, they have set up some trail cams, and they've captured some images, as you can see, of the Fusa. One of the biggest problems facing the Fusa, though, because this is the only predator in Madagascar. It's classified completely on its own. It was originally thought to be have been from the mongoose family, and then the civet family, and then this, that, and so they just completely reclassified it in its own classification. And it's the largest and only big predator on the entire island, with the exception of the odd introduced thing. They've got Indian civets that have been introduced. But because of that, and then with human habitation comes livestock like chickens and ducks, and these guys are incredible raiders of chicken coops at night. And so they have been persecuted to the point of being a vulnerable species. And so one of the reserves that we go to at Anjajavi, they have got a Fusa collaring program. You can see the one on the bottom, I think it's the bottom right, has got a collar on it.
Top left.
And the top left as well. Sorry, that's my screen's blocked by that there. So, and they are with radio telemetry, they're tracking these Fusa, and they're being able to then identify the numbers and see where they're moving in their movements. It's a fascinating creature. I mean, we could do an entire webinar just on Fusa. But amazing climbers. These are the only predators, or the main predators of lemurs, with the exception of birds of prey. But one of the projects that is ongoing in conservation. Then the next one here, this is the Aldabra tortoise. So originally thought to have evolved in the Aldabra archipelago, which is north of Madagascar, famously known to be just south of the Seychelles. They have recently been then not reclassified so much, but studied, and they think that they might have actually originated in Madagascar. But by the time any form of science got to the island, they were extinct because they were a food source. And you can see the one on the top right, how it's floating there. They're not the best swimmers, but they're incredible floaters. So their lungs are on the top of underneath the top of their shell, and so they'll just happily float from the mangroves when the tide comes up, get into the current and go. There was a tortoise that washed up on shore in Tanzania, maybe within the last 10 or 12 years, that was thought to have been at sea for about 7 weeks. And it actually had barnacles growing that had attached to its limbs, and all it needed was a little bit of food and water, and it was happy on its way. And these guys at Anjajavi have got 12 of the remaining 25 of these tortoises that are left in Madagascar. There's 25 across the whole island. There are no others left that are still in Madagascar, and recently those just had, as you can see on the top left, just successfully hatched a clutch of eggs. So it's a project that is going to be slow going. I mean, the vet at the bottom there, Elodie, you can see that tortoise in front of him. I think that might be George or John. They've given them very easy names to remember, and I think he's about 25 or 28, and they can live up to 120. So still got a long way to go. But a project that's having quite a bit of success. And then the ii, as you can see here. So you can see that the trail cam picture there, that's their female ii, that you can actually see the antenna of the collar that's going over the back of her head. And they are helping protect these, because within the Malagasy culture, the ai actually got its name from I, because it's such a weird looking creature. And there's a lot of folklore and what they call faidi, which is bad luck associated with this animal. So almost exclusively up until recently, if these animals are seen, they were killed on sight because they were thought to have brought bad luck. So one of the projects that they're doing is taking from an area that is being deforested and moving them into their reserve. And this, you can see the female here, Elodie, set up the trail cam right in front of one of her nests. They have up to sort of 25 to 30 nests they'll move between, depending on how where they are when they're foraging. So those are just some of the conservation initiatives that are going on in Madagascar. It's a huge push that tourism definitely has to help, because it's the conservation that, or it's the tourism that brings in the conservation funding. And then I'll hand over to Richard to do the last little. There's some things in Madagascar that we haven't been able to cover, but there are definitely some very, very strange creatures that Richard is going to just finish off with us.
All right, cool. Thanks, Matt. Just to, again, we could have done this webinar over a whole day with no breaks and chatted about everything, because everything is so unique and wonderful. On the left-hand side, we've got one of the Madagascar ground boas around one of our local guides' necks. Wasn't trying to kill him. Everything there is really easy with people. What you find with a lot of bird watching, and especially I'm a photographer, is sometimes you actually have to be like, okay, can I move away from this now, please, because you're too close to me, for birds and things, because they don't have that innate fear of men, of people, because of the fact that we only arrived and started settling 2,000 years ago. And every snake, and there are quite a few snakes on Madagascar, not one of them is venomous. And it's thought that it's actually an evolutionary step forward to not be venomous, to actually just be a constrictor and a swallower rather than having to inject venom. So a lot of cool snakes to be seen. Top right, we have a giraffe-necked weevil. This is a male giraffe-necked weevil. Tiny little things about this big that sit on one specific type of tree. And that whole neck is for fighting with other males. And the female's got a shorter, without the second joint neck, so she still looks like a giraffe, and she uses that neck to actually roll up a leaf to lay her egg inside. And then by far the coolest thing on the island are the leaf-tailed geckos. So the one on the bottom right is called a satanic leaf-tailed gecko, or a fantastic leaf-tailed gecko, and they got these red eyes and they look exactly like a leaf. I promise you, it is the best fun in the world when we get into a forest and the local guides find them, and then everyone sits and tries to find where these things are. So we're going to go to the next slide now, and I'll show you the mossy leaf-tailed gecko on the left-hand side. And on the right, I've zoomed in a bit on its face. So if you look on the left, just below the two leaves, you will see the tail and the body moving down. It's very camouflaged in there. And I've actually chosen an image that shows it off a little bit, because I have images where we could play hide and seek the whole day. And these guys are incredible. They can see 1,000 times better than us at night, so they can hunt by starlight. They're the only lizards that can change their color. And this one, if it jumps from one tree to the next, by the time it's landed on the next, it's already adapted its coloration to what it's going to land on. It's absolutely insane. And then if you look on the right, around it, the frills around its edges, it all looks like the lichens growing on the tree, and they're always face down like that, so there's no glint in the eye, because the kuas that I mentioned earlier will be out hunting them, and even though we can't find them, the kuas still do. So it's an incredible place with mad biodiversity, with things you will never see in your life, and it just is a mind blow, absolute mind blow. I love being there. I know Matt loves being there. We chat a lot about it. And I really hope that you've enjoyed today and listening to us, and we're really happy to take some questions.
Well, thank you both so much. This is Lee popping back in, and I have got a lot of questions here, so much enthusiasm. So let me ask you first this one. What is the deforestation rate or reforestation prognosis?
So, so Madagascar, as it is, everyone often thinks of Madagascar as just this giant jungle, which is not entirely true. Yes, it was forest originally, but down in the southwest, it was dry deciduous forest, so very much like a very thickly wooded savanna. And then you do have the rainforest, the tropical rainforest on the eastern mountain range. It's a bit of a sobering thought that in the couple of thousands of years that humans have been there, we've been able to eradicate almost 97% of what was once forested. So there's about 3.5% remaining of native forest. That's what we would call primary forest. That's untouched forest. Now you've got a secondary forest, which is now reforested, sort of degraded land. So you'll be walking through a forest and you'll still have a few alien invasive species there. But as we are right now, there are extensive reforestation projects that are undergoing, where they're not just trying to start a new forest, but one of the biggest problems where you have this sort of very spread out human settlements is that a village living here and a village living here, they'll cut a line in a forest there, and so you've got this very fragmented forest areas in a lot of places, and so they're trying to tie all of those together to then create these land bridges that can then be, the people can live outside of it, because there's still a lot of villages that need what is in the forest for traditional medicine, for lots of things, for water. And so it's the to try and find the balance between human and conservation activity. But I mean, a lot of the places we go to, one of the last place where we saw those the conservation projects that are undergoing, they've gone from a reserve of about 7,000 or 8,000 hectares to 20,000 odd hectares, and they are reforesting as they go. And this is just land that they are getting from local communities. They're helping them with proper farming techniques, and then allowing reforestation to take place adjacent to that.
Thank you. That's very interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
I think if I can just add a little, that whole concept that Matt brought in with reforestation and communities being split, it's so important to understand that the biggest part of conservation is keeping the people in mind. We often go, oh, the animals, the forest. But if you don't have the community buy-in, like the last place that Matt was talking about, which actually went from about 700 acres to 40,000 acres now in growth and 5 communities worth, if you don't have that buy-in, you don't have the proliferation of the things. And the other part of it is this fragmentation has a huge impact on populations. Matt showed us the greater bamboo lemur earlier. The one forest we go to only has 2 individuals left inside that forest. That forest has 2 individuals, full stop. So this habitat fragmentation is a driver of speciation. It's a driver of possible extinction, just because there's not enough genetic material floating around to move between everything.
Okay, thank you. So with the increased interest in Madagascar, is it having more of a positive or a negative impact on wildlife and conservation?
My personal opinion is that it is the only way we're really going to have a chance of saving it, because if the forest is not worth more money than cutting down the trees and planting a rice paddy, it will disappear. But tourism brings in dollars. It brings in money, it brings in jobs, it brings in different food, brings in education. It changes the whole aspect of how people look at it. So for me, tourism has its negatives, because there's some places that are a little overcrowded, and Madagascar is still learning, but it in an overall, it is generously good to the island.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
good.
I mean, when you've got an average annual income of $600 for a breadwinner for a family, that's annual income. When you bring tourism into it, where you can pay a local guide $4 or $5 or $10 a day, that it's a game changer. It really is for conservation in such a, I mean, it's top 10 poorest countries in the world. So if you can emphasize conservation and tourism in a place that has such a finite amount of it to conserve it, it's the only way that these animals are going to be protected and safe.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So I have a question for you from our friends Lauren and Parker. They are students from Houston, Texas. They've been on almost every webinar of ours. And their question for you today is, are there any poisonous insects in Madagascar?
Poisonous insects.
Poison is a broad.
Wasps. That's a bit of a sensitive one, isn't it?
It's a very sensitive one. Let's not go there. But poison is ingested, venom is injected. So I'm not sure what animals would be poisonous, that if you ate them, there might be something that would have adverse effects. But in terms of venom, wasps and bees, can you think of anything, Matt? I can't think of anything outside of that.
There are
Scorpion.
Yeah, I mean scorpions being the obvious ones. There are some scorpions in the dry areas down south that, as our local guide Roland, who doesn't have an allergic reaction to them, says they are very, very sore. But they have been known to cause fatalities with people who have underlying conditions. And then I think there are one or two frog species that might have a topical toxin where if you touch it, it'll cause a reaction.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, we have a lot of photographers listening in today. And one of our photography questions is, what type lenses would you recommend bringing?
Okay, I think I'll take this one, Matt. But
yeah,
the biggest thing that you have to remember with photography on this island is the fact that you're in jungles. So it is incredibly dark for the most part for the first half of our trip. So fast lenses in terms of a 2.8 or an f4 lens is very preferable. And lengthwise, sort of 300, 400 mils is great. You need a wide angle because there's incredible landscapes once we start moving out of the jungles. And if anything, a macro lens. Just it is so much incredible stuff that you can capture with a macro lens that you can use. So those three lenses, sort of 100, 400 lens, or a 70 to 200 2.8 with an extender, a macro lens and a wide angle. And if you can do a fast one so that I can teach you some photography tricks while we're out there, especially in Isalo and Anjajavi, where you have a night sky like you've never seen in your life before.
Oh, wow, that sounds amazing. Okay, thanks. So one more question for you, and then we will call it a day, call it an evening for the two of you. Do lemurs have predators?
Go for it, Matt.
So yes, you can. So we highlighted one of them in the conservation topic. We had the fossa, which is their main predator, and their only mammalian predator, let's call it that. Then the boas, as we saw, that was around Roland's neck, in that one, in the weird and wacky at the very end. They are also predators. There's the tree boa as well as the ground boas. So they are arboreal and terrestrial. And then some of your larger raptors. So they've got a harrier hawk, They've got, well, the fish eagles aren't the predators of lemurs, but they've got some of the large raptors that are predators of some of the smaller lemurs, and then some of the owls as well for the nocturnal lemurs. So yes, there's several predators of lemurs being encompassed by lots of different groups.
Mm-hmm.
Let's put it this way: with anything in nature, there has to be a balance. So there has to be something at the top of the food chain that's going to control numbers. So something like a mouse lemur that's this big, that breeds 2 to 3 times a year, will have more predators than something like an injury, which weighs 20 pounds. So you can see how that would all work itself out.
Sure. Yep. Thank you. Okay, well, that's my last question for today. I have to tell you something. So we broadcast this over regular computers, but we also broadcast it over mobile devices, and I can see what people on mobile devices are doing, and they have the ability to give little hearts for things that they like that you say. And so for people on mobile devices, you've received, and now the hearts are going crazy. We're at 5,700 hearts from people today just on the mobile devices, and we've had hundreds and hundreds just on the regular computer as well who've loved everything you've had to say. So thank you so much for staying up late for us. I want to turn it back over to the two of you for closing comments.
Well, thank you for having us, Lee, and thank you for hosting this daily dose to NatHab. It's certainly nice to be able to bring some of nature into our homes when so many of us are at home. And from our side, it was an absolute pleasure, and I hope we were able to tick off some of the boxes. Madagascar is an incredibly tough topic to squish into anything under an hour. As Richard said earlier, we could do probably a week of webinars on just one of those things. So yeah, we hope we were able to pique your interest in this amazing place that we both love so much.
Thank you all for having us. And again, to reiterate what Matt says, Madagascar is an incredible island. It's an incredible, should be a continent just with the diversity. We are very fortunate to visit it on a regular basis. And I think I want to thank NatHab for having us and for letting us explain this all to you guys and share some of this to all of us as we go through a really tough time on this planet at this point in time. I think nature's the only thing winning at this point in time. So stay safe, clean your hands, stay at home. Let's get through this. Thank you, NatHab.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you both. And we will get the replay out to all of you within about 24 hours. So we thank you all for being with us. We hope you'll be with us next week. We have a whole new series coming up. So with that, we'll say good day and conclude our webinar. Goodbye, everybody.